Where we left off is I was talking about the D5600 body here. It's about $1,000 body with the kit lens here. Great thing about this tool here is that it's small, it's light. It's probably the smallest DSLR in our lineup. Nice and compact. It's a fully interchangeable system, so at some point I can put on a telephoto lens. We're going to talk about telephoto lenses in a second. This kit takes pictures at 5 frames per second. So at 5 frames per second, you can get, freeze a lot of action, but you also have a 39-point autofocusing system. So I would jump right to this model because with 39-point autofocus, you can capture a lot of action, make sure your camera doesn't automatically focus on the background. Other thing about it is it does have a tilting screen, so if you were to get some low shots or some high shots, you could use the live view screen for that. It also has a Bluetooth and Wi-Fi capability. So Nikon cameras have had Wi-Fi capabilities for years and years and years now, but only lately they've implemented Bluetooth. So in a lot of the sporting events I go to, I'm able to actually upload pictures right to our Facebook page between periods, between whistles even, because it's automatically sending a 2 megapixel file right to my phone. So that's the D5600 right there, and I'll just show you a couple of shots here. Chris, can we get it up on the screen right there, the feed, so I can see? Or Jake, just get up the feed here on the front screen. Feed? Yeah. Cool, perfect, okay. So here on the back here, I just want to show you what we can do with the D5600 is right here at the back, there's a little button that you press right there, and that'll give you options to improve your frame rate. So if I just press that right now, I can go from, say, single shot to continuous high speed, and that's where you can get like a 5 frame per second burst, snap, snap, snap. The other thing you can do with this model is that, let's just say you've never used a Nikon DSLR before and really don't know much about photography. All you have to do is put it on the scene dial right there, okay? And if you look at the back of the screen, all I have to do is rotate this dial, and there's all these different modes you can choose from, and one of them actually is a sports mode. So the sports mode right now will take all your settings, focus, as well as your exposure settings, and make it so that it's the best for sports. So you can see right there, it jacks up the ISO to 3200 ISO and gives you a fast shutter speed because it knows that you want to stop the action. It knows you want to shoot with a wide open aperture, and it configures most of your settings to mimic sort of a sports scene. So that right there is the D5600. Now, if you wanted to step up to the next model with the D5600, I would probably recommend going up to the D7500. But before I talk about that, I also want to mention the 70-300 lens, which I also have attached to it right now. So if you wanted to get closer to your action, the next thing you want to do is get a telephoto lens. And a great place to start is the 70-300 millimeter lens. Nikon has just newly redesigned this model in the last couple of years. It's super small, super light, and at about $580, it's a relatively inexpensive second lens in your kit. You can actually get a lot less when you buy it as a kit together. But with the new AFP motor, it's probably faster than most of our AFS lenses out there. That's the great thing about this lens. Even though it's a kind of an entry-level starter lens, the aperture goes up to 6.3, so it's a smaller aperture that keeps the size and weight down. It also means that you have a really lightweight kit when you pair it with the 18-55 AFP lens, so it's not taking a lot of weight and size in your bag when you're carrying all these things to these sporting events. Other great thing is that it's compatible with the new cameras now. So for example, the D7500 is the next model that I would step up to. And a great thing about this model is it now goes up to 8 frames per second. And if you're shooting in RAW, you can shoot up to 50 shots in a row, I believe, with this camera. So if you're looking for something a little bit beefier in terms of the autofocus, which is now 51 points, you have 50 shots in a row with 8 frames per second, plus it's weather sealed. Take a look at the D7500. It's Nikon's newest technology. It's actually the same sensor as the D500. So this sensor here can go up to 51,200 ISO. I didn't mention, but the D5600 can go up to 25,600. So that means, even if you're using these 6.3 aperture lenses, you can still get great shutter speeds because your ISO on these cameras can go really, really high. Plus, this lens is relatively lightweight. With the materials that they've used in this, they've taken out the metal, they've put in a firm carbon fiber hybrid plastic in here. It's really lightweight in the hand. So check it out at your local Nikon retailer. That's the D7500. Now, for those of you that may have a full frame Nikon DSLR and are looking to get, again, a lightweight sports option, check out the new 70-300 full frame lens. So if you have, for example, a D750 or a D850 and you don't necessarily want to get anything bigger, check out the 70-300. We now have an AFP version of this that just came out in the last year. It's about $1,000. It'll also work with the crop sensors such as the D7500, and if you anticipate yourself going up to a full frame in the future, might as well just go right up to the 70-300 AFP lens. This is now also a 5.6 lens, and it has actual mechanical switches so you can turn on and off the VR as well as the autofocus right on the lens itself. All right, so that's about $1,000, 70-300 AFP. Now, I'll show you a couple more lenses here, and that is, one of them here is the 70-200. Now, we're stepping down a little bit in the focal length, but the great thing about the 70-200, if we can get a tight shot of that there, is that it is now an f4 lens, okay? So this lens is nice and small. It has an internal zoom mechanism here, so it doesn't actually change shape. This is very, very highly weather sealed. It's actually probably one of our most highest rated vibration reduction lenses at 5 stops, and it's relatively lightweight and small. It doesn't take a lot of space in your bag, but it will give you double the shutter speed of, say, a 70-300, which maxes out at 5.6. So instead of, say, with a 70-300, you might get a 1/250 shutter speed. With an f4, you'd be looking at a 1/500th shutter speed. Now, just to drive that point even further, if you go up to the 70-200 2.8, now you can get maybe 1,000th of a second, where, say, on a 5.6 lens, you would be shooting at maybe 1/250. Now, the other thing about getting lenses with faster apertures is that it allows you to even drop your ISO down to even lower levels. So if you don't need to shoot at 1/1000th of a second, maybe you can deal with 1/250th or 1/500th of a second. You can reduce your ISO. So if you're shooting with older bodies and they don't go up to 12,800 or 25,600 ISO, if you got a better lens, it would actually improve your body, improve your fidelity. So those are the things to consider when you're looking at these systems. Again, concentrate more so on your technique and your positioning, which we're going to talk about now. Now, when you're looking at all these lenses and you're saying 70 to 300, 70 to 200, well, which one should I get? How far can they reach? Let's just show you. I have a couple of examples here that I have taken from baseball. It's baseball season, so let's show you a couple of baseball examples. This is taken with a DX camera with a 200 millimeter lens. And again, remember with DX cameras, you actually have a crop factor of 1.5. So your 200 millimeter lens is actually a 300 millimeter lens. That's why I can get so tight on these shots. This is not cropped after the fact in camera. This is actually done right out of camera. So that's the way it was framed, sitting right on the sidelines with a 200 millimeter lens. So you can actually get really close with a 200 millimeter lens. Now, I mentioned how in these cameras they can go up to 5 frames per second, or in this camera, let's just say the D7500, I believe I can shoot here at a full 8 frames per second. So that's 8 frames per second, 50 shots in a row. And I know people that get SLRs right off the bat, they tend to put it on that continuous high speed and shoot. And at the end of the day, they get a lot of shots. Great thing about SLRs is that they have a very fast response rate just shooting in single burst mode. It actually responds very quickly to your finger, and it's almost as fast as my brain can think. I'm taking that snap. So for me, the best thing that I can give you in terms of tips for taking better amateur sports photos is to anticipate the action. Know your sport and know when there's a play going to be made. So if you're shooting baseball, you can anticipate that there's going to be a play at first base. You know that there's going to be some action there. That's the time you want to get ready, pre-focus, hit that shutter release. Or if you know that there's going to be a throw from the outfield, you know, line up your focus point on that player and take a shot just as he's releasing the ball. That's all you need. That's the action. That's the money shot right there. So again, that's my first tip is know your sport, anticipate the action, and you don't have to rely on the spray and pray, as we say in the photo industry, to try to get, you know, so many shots. Again, when you're anticipating the action, that applies to all different sports. Say soccer, for example, when two players are going to engage and go after the ball, try to anticipate that engagement and get those peak of action shots, such as, you know, the shot that I'm going to, if we can bring it up right now, Jacob, in soccer examples. Right there, you know, sitting on the sidelines. For soccer, I would suggest a 300 millimeter lens. Because the field is so big, I would suggest going to a 300 millimeter lens for this shot. These shots here are taken from the sidelines, so, you know, anticipating the action, following the ball, and taking it at peak of action shots. That's what I would recommend for people. The other thing, as I would say, is positioning. Now, a lot of people tend to, for spectator sports, stand right on the sidelines. I would say if you're a photographer, line up by the nets or line up by the goalie so you can actually see the player coming towards the camera. You can get their reactions and their facial expressions as they're moving towards the ball. And again, you can accomplish this with 200 millimeter lenses, you know, 300 millimeter lenses. They're all around that same focal length, but if you're using a DX camera like a D5600 or a D7500, you get that extra reach. Just remember, multiply that focal length by 1.5. Okay, so I think we're going to show a couple more examples here in soccer. Again, if you're lined up at the goalie and the player is coming at you, you know, you can make sure you get these shots. Now, I just want to show you here that the depth of field is very, very shallow in contrast to your subject, and that's because using telephoto lenses, okay? And like the next shot I'm going to show you, very shallow depth of field, you're really going to blur out that background. So it's important to keep your focus tight and use the continuous focus mode that I'm going to show you in a second. But one more example shot that I'm going to show you here, and tip I'm going to give you, is change your perspective. Don't always shoot from the standing up position or you know, sitting on the sidelines. In this shot here, I got really, really low. I was basically tummy down on the grass. And it gives you, especially for short kids, that angle shooting up that you don't normally see when you're shooting, you know, from your adult stance, shooting at lower kids. It gives them a different perspective. Now, I talked about autofocus, and that's really important when shooting sports. The great thing about Nikon cameras, it has tracking capability, and that's what you need, especially when children or athletes are running and moving at a very fast rate. That's something that you just cannot mirror in smartphones. So what I'm going to show you right now is the interface of the D7500, and you can see this when you're taking it out of the box. It's automatically on AFA right now, but you can switch it to AFS. And AFS is when you have static subjects. And if you look at the AF area mode up at the top there, there's 3 different modes you can choose from. There's an auto area, single point, and a group. But for shooting sports, you really want to be on AFC. So in the next set of slides here I'm going to show you is the AFC option. All you have to do is change it to AFC. And now if you look at the top, you're going to see that I can change it to 9 point, 21 point, 51 point. There's even a mode called 3D tracking that will move and pan around with your subject as they move through the frame. There's a group dynamic area AF mode. And I'm not going to go through what all those modes do, but I just want to show you that there are so much more options in tracking your subject, and that's unleashed when you utilize the AFC mode. That's continuous focus, and it also will move the point around the screen when you're tracking that. Now, I'm also going to show you that interface when you're on, say, a D5600. So if we can get a tight shot on this, if you're on a D5600 or a D3400, all you have to do, like here in the D5600, this is now touchscreen. All I do is go here at the bottom. It's already on AFC, but you can see here at the bottom I have all these different options between AFA, AFS, and AFC. If you're wondering what AFA is, it actually changes between AFC and AFS depending on whether your subject is moving. But if you don't want to rely on that and always put it on AFC, you can pick that right off the bat. Okay, so that is the interface right on the D5600, and that's important when you're shooting sports. Okay, so we've looked at some outdoor sports with soccer and baseball. You can apply the same things, whether it's football or rugby or anything with these big fields. And the general consensus is that you can put the camera on sports mode if you have a 5600 or a D7500 and get great shots. The tricky part is, especially here in Canada, is when you're shooting inside of arenas that have tricky lighting, they have low lighting, but still fast-moving moving subjects. So let's go into a few tips and tricks on how to get the best shots here. Now, first of all, before I do that, I just want to address what a lot of people tend to do in these arenas, or sports in general, is use their smartphone and try to zoom in digitally to get some shots. Now, this is just a shot I took the other day, last week, indoor in an arena, and I used the 10 times digital zoom on my smartphone. And this is the type of fidelity that I'm getting on that device. From the same vantage point, I picked up my Nikon DSLR, popped on my telephoto lens, and I was able to get far more detail. Now you can see this, if you're watching it on Facebook right now on a small screen, check it out on a larger screen. You can really see the difference in detail. Actually, I'm going to put it up side by side. It's not only the detail, but it's the color and the contrast as well. So that's what you get with the Nikon DSLR. And that's pitted right up against your average everyday 2018 smartphone. So we'll show you a couple more examples here of what you get inside of an arena when you're utilizing the pinch zoom. So again, I'm utilizing the pinch zoom. And at the time it looked sort of okay on the screen. I could tell it was losing some quality, but I took almost the same shot with a Nikon DSLR and from the same vantage point. And again, I can get much better clarity, better color, better brightness, better contrast. And the key thing here is that, those kids aren't even moving. If they were moving, it would be even harder to track them. This is, again, I was trying my best with my smartphone to track this little guy here as he was running, chasing the ball. But, when they're moving, it just becomes a blur. And if you nail your settings right with a Nikon DSLR, you can actually get them in motion, get those action shots that you want. Those are the peak of action shots that you really want to capture when you want to remember these times when they're playing amateur sports. So that's taken with a D7500 in an arena here in Ontario. And that's taken through the boards. So one of the tips that I'm gonna give you when shooting through the boards is if you have a Nikon DSLR, look at your picture controls. Don't leave it on the standard, put it on something called Vivid. Vivid is a picture control that would increase your contrast as well as your saturation and allows you to get better detail when shooting through the boards. Now, I'm torn because I love getting the best detail possible, but I can't necessarily get that when I'm shooting through the boards. I tend to lose a lot of contrast. So what I tend to do is shoot above the boards. A lot of the arenas now in Canada, probably throughout the United States and other parts of the country, you can shoot above the boards because you have these cool vantage points in stands that you can actually see above the board line. So in this shot here, I took this actually with a smartphone, and smartphones actually do a great job before you zoom in. It takes a decent picture zoomed out, but once you use that digital 10 times zoom, you lose a lot of that detail. It looks good from afar, but it's far from good, as they say. If you take your 70-300 or 70-200, pop it on that Nikon DSLR, bump up that ISO, you can get that same vantage point, but a lot better clarity. You can freeze the action. If the ball is moving, you can freeze it. If they're running, as I showed you in that previous shot, you could freeze the action. So I just want to show you those contrast and details. And again, the much better quality that you can get above the board line because you're not shooting through these nasty boards with these, you know, puck markings on it and things like that. So I tend to shoot above the boards a lot, and I'll show you a couple more shots here of some older kids playing hockey now. We'll move on to hockey. And again, anticipate the turns, anticipate, you know, the points where they're going to be angled towards the camera. That's the action shots, the money shots you want to get. And again, I'm shooting above the boards here using a telephoto lens, but the problem is when you shoot above the boards, a lot of times they're looking down at the puck and they're not looking towards you. So if you can get a vantage point lower, if you can get in with the coach and shoot on the bench, change your perspective, shoot from the player's bench and get a much better vantage point. This way you can see the player's eyes, you can see their emotion as they're chasing the puck. And this, I think, you know, you can cover easily with a 200mm lens on shooting from the bench, or, you know, with 300mm lens, easy in any hockey or ball hockey arena. So that's my tips. Change your perspective. You can shoot above the board, shoot, you know, at the ice level, but if you can, shoot from the player bench itself and get much better shots. Now, next thing I'm going to talk about is one of the, you know, top 5 tips that people are always asking me to give, is that how do I compensate for lighting inside of these arenas? A lot of times the lighting is tricky and the auto white balance may not correct for the fluorescent lighting in the arena. So here's one shot. I actually did take this with a Nikon DSLR, but I put all the settings on complete automatic. And this was a mixed lighting situation. There was actually daylight coming into the arena. There was fluorescent lighting in the arena. The camera was kind of fooled. It didn't know what to do with the lighting. So what I did, the first thing that I did was that I hard-coded the white balance to fluorescent. So the next shot you're gonna see here is fluorescent lighting. That basically neutralizes the white balance in the arena. Whether you're shooting ball hockey or ice hockey, you wanna neutralize the grays, make them pure gray. Next shot I'm gonna show you is how I was able to correct the exposure. And all I did in this case was I made it manual exposure. You could do the same thing in aperture priority or shutter priority with the exposure compensation dial. Again, something that you can do with Nikon DSLRs relatively easily and get those shots that basically clean up what the auto settings were trying to do well, but you can do a whole lot better if you just make 2 adjustments. And that's the white balance and that's bumping up your exposure. Okay, so those are my 2 tips and tricks for that. Now, all the pictures that I've basically shown you thus far have been with telephoto lenses. I've been talking about the 70-300, 70-200, and getting those tight crops. And that's great. That's something that we can't get with our smartphone. But I would encourage you, as you're traveling around to all these different stadiums or fields or arenas, don't forget about your wide-angle lenses. Whip out your wide-angle lens from time to time and take some shots of the actual arena so you can remember all these different arenas we've been to. I think my kids playing hockey, we've been to about 40 different arenas in the province, and that's not an exaggeration. And I want to remember these things, not just the tight shots, but actually where we were. So I think it's important to make sure you carry a wide angle lens around with you. And you know what? Because, you know, I'm a photographer, I carry lenses around with me wherever I go. I even bring out my portrait lenses with me and bring out my 1.8 lenses, my 1.4 lenses. I'll pop it on the camera every now and then and just get a shallow depth of field shot of some of these little guys when they're playing, just to give it a little bit of variation in my portfolio of shots there at the end of the day in our photo album. We want to get a little bit of variation. Other thing I suggest people do is not only get those peak of action shots, but you know what? What's so important in amateur sports is getting those behind the scenes shots. It's all about those moments in between the whistles, in between the innings, in between the periods, where they're talking with the players. You know, when we're traveling in tournaments, there's a lot of downtime, but there's a lot of smiles in between those downtimes as well. You know, don't forget about those in-between moments. Those moments right there are the ones that the players remember the best. It's all about, you know, the camaraderie in the locker room, the camaraderie on the bench. It's remembering who the coaches were at that time of their lives. They play such an important part, you know, of their careers. So remember all those things. Take behind shots as much as you can. You know, here I'm taking a shot of the actual picture day, but it's the behind the scenes shots. You know, it's actually taken in a little gymnasium here. Remember those, you know, those trophies that they get when they won, and remember who their coach were. And, you know, for my kids, it's all about the snacks at the end of the game. So I want to remember that because, you know, at some point it becomes a beer league. So it's a different kind of snacks. It's no longer freezies. So remember all those things, and remember, you know, when you have these SLRs, it's not always about the telephoto lenses. You can get the wide angle lenses, portrait lenses in there, and have a good time shooting your amateur sports. So we have covered that in a whirlwind there. I think we're gonna go to Facebook right now, Facebook Live, and answer some questions. And feel free to chime in, guys, if you have any questions on sports photography in general, tech questions, feel free to shoot it my way. Okay, so I'm gonna go for, first of all, we have an inbox question here from Ali. She asks, sometimes my photographs look like silhouettes. How do I fix this? Okay, I think I just kind of mentioned that in fixing your exposure settings. So if you're shooting in ice hockey, for example, that's probably the most amount of times you're going to get silhouettes because the ice is pure white and the camera is trying to meter towards the ice and not your player. So what you're going to need to do is use either your exposure compensation dial or go to full manual. Go to full manual and increase your ISO. I would probably say a base ISO good to start at is 6400, then feather your shutter speed from there. But ultimately, I would suggest for sports, you keep it at a minimum of about a 500th of a second shutter speed. And then from there, you might have to feather your ISO up and down to make sure that your exposure is focused on the player and not on the surface, which is what the camera tends to do if you put it on the automatic settings. So if your subject is looking a little bit silhouetted, I would suggest abandoning the complete automatic mode and going to, say, semi-automatic mode, like aperture priority. Okay, great question. Next question from our inbox comes from Dave, and his question is, sometimes my shots look blurry. That's a common question. How do I get them to be sharper? Well, first of all, you gotta get a Nikon SLR because these are the devices that can give you fast shutter speeds. With smart devices, even though they're called smart devices, ironically enough, you don't really know what's going on in terms of the way it's choosing your settings. With SLRs, you have complete control, okay? You can leave a lot of the heavy lifting up to the camera, but if you wanted to dial in your shutter speed to the exact amount, you can do that. So as I said in the previous question, choose a shutter speed at least of 1/500th of a second and go from there. Some of our cameras, like the D3400, they actually have a guide mode that helps you choose your settings for sports, for portraits, for landscapes, and it'll actually give you suggestions of what shutter speeds to use. For sports, again, I suggest at least a 500th of a second. If you're shooting outside, soccer, baseball, football, and you have the sun, that's where you go to the maximum. Shoot at 1/4000th of a second if you want, 1/8000th of a second if your camera will allow it, and get the maximum shutter speed. That's how you can stop the action and make sure you won't have a blurry shot. You could literally be running as fast as you can and it will stop your shoelaces in that shot. So great question, Dave. Again, the shutter speed is the key. Increase it at least 500th of a second or as fast as your camera will go. Okay, we've got a couple more here. One from Jane. Her question is, how many shots can I get on one battery, and should I get an extra battery? Fair question. From my perspective, it's always a great idea to have an extra battery. I never want to be in a situation where my camera stops shooting and I'm in the second period of the game and I'm missing shots that I could be getting. So I always want to be able to shoot at least to the end of the game. But to tell you the truth, Nikon SLRs, with their battery consumption and how efficient they are, they can last you probably the entire game if you get a camera like a D7500. Even D5600, D3400, they have a smaller cell, but they are so power efficient. And that's the beauty about SLRs, is that they rarely rely on the screen. It's all through the viewfinder. So it utilizes very low energy consumption. Actually, these are rated for over 1,000 shots each. A lot of these cameras now are averaging 1,500 shots per charge, 1,700 shots per charge, 1,800 shots per charge. And that's no exaggeration. I mean, I'm shooting sometimes over that. So, for one game, you're easily going to get that in one game. So it's up to you. I always like having a second battery just for safekeeping, especially now because I'm always using the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi features, which drain the battery a lot. So I always have a second battery. I would suggest for anyone. But to tell you the truth, you could probably go through one game with one battery. Okay, great question. One more from Rob, and his question is, what's the best lens for sports? So it's a fair question. I went through a couple of those options here. The best lens for sports, I think, would be something that has a little bit of a telephoto reach, but also has a fast aperture. So if you're gonna ask me the best, my tendency is to go towards something that has a fast aperture. I mean, we have many telephoto lenses in our lineup, but again, the best lens is the one you have with you. So if you're gonna be shooting a D5600 and you have a budget of about $1,500, you can get the kit lens, the body, and the 70-300 telephoto lens all in one kit, and that will give you the reach to do everything all in one. So that was a great question. Thank you for that, Rob. Okay, I lied. We do have one more question. We got a little bit of time, so I'm gonna field this one from Corey Shaw. And his question is, what lens is your favorite to use when you're shooting ice hockey? Okay, good question. I'm gonna answer this honestly because even though I showed you these lenses right here, I do have a favorite, and when I'm shooting my son's ice hockey, I oftentimes pick the 200mm f2 when I'm shooting from the sidelines. And the reason for that is it just gives me crazy ISO capabilities and shutter speed options. I can basically have limitless shutter speed options, so much so that I'm actually throttling down my shutter speed because it's shooting faster than the frequency of the lights. So in that case, I have to throttle it down. But for versatility, and if I had to take one lens to the rink, I would probably go with the 70-200 2.8. It's an expensive lens, don't get me wrong, and this new version has just come out in the last year, and Nikon has thrown every single piece of technology and coatings and features, autofocusing, minimum focusing distance into this lens. It's lighter weight than the previous version. So this is actually one of my favorites to use in terms of versatility, because with prime lenses you can't zoom. As much as I love to get the fast shutter speeds and the low ISOs on those, this gives me the versatility of 70 to 200. And so if I'm shooting and the action comes close to me, I can thread the zoom ring down to 70 and I can get some action that's close to me. I can zoom it out to 200, and you can even utilize the in-camera cropping feature to get a little extra distance if I need to at the end. So I think with a 70 to 200 2.8 and going towards all the different arenas, you know, in amateur sports, you would be well served to get a 70 to 200 2.8. To tell you the truth, I could probably shoot with an f4 if I had the newer bodies that go up to 25,600. So I would say if your body goes up to 6,400 or 12,800, look at a 2.8 lens. If you have the newer bodies that go up to 51,000, such as the D7500, well, you might be able to get away with a smaller, lighter, more inexpensive lens, such as the 70 to 200 f4. But the key for me is to make sure that shutter speed is at least 1/500th of a second to stop the action. So, great question, Corey, and I thank our entire Facebook audience for their questions tonight and your participation. It's been a blast talking to you about something that I thoroughly enjoy, and that's amateur sports. It's all about the emotion and the fun times, but it's even more fun when we can remember them with clear, crisp images, and that's what you can get with some of these cool lenses and bodies from Nikon. So that's all for today. We'll see you next time on Nikon TV.